Good afternoon. Welcome to the Healthy Indoors Live Show. I'm your host, Bob Krell. I'm the founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine, and I'm really happy that you took time on your Thursday to join us. Today's show is going to be a little bit different. Yeah, a lot different. The topic for today is the subjective science of mold sampling and interpretation. We just didn't want to put that in the title because it was just too many words and it just looked really cumbersome. But to that end, it's a little bit of a role change here today. So I'm going to be more of the guest on the show today. And our typical moderator, the editor and actually very heavily involved individual in the Healthy Indoors organization, Susan Valenti. Hi, Susan. Susan's taking the role of, at this point, she's going to be taking the role of the moderator and the host, I guess. I'm gonna leave the host mode. So one of the things I would like to invite our online studio audience to do, normally we don't let you turn your cameras on until the second half of the show, but today you're welcome to turn your cameras on right away. We're going to take your questions in real time rather than making you type them in the chat. Although you're welcome to do that as well if you don't want to come on camera. Again, those of you in the live virtual studio audience, use your reactions button down in the bottom menu and click raise your hand if you want to, if somebody's not calling on you. That'll just make it easier for us. And we'll take your questions in real time. So, yeah, Susan, how do you feel in this position?
Nervous.
Are you really nervous?
I like being behind the scenes.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to try to make it easy for you. I'll just keep talking and you won't have to do anything.
Well, no. I actually do have I do have a great first question. So can I ask it?
Yeah, I guess I'll have you ask the first question because otherwise I'll just start off going down a path.
Okay. So last week, it actually came up on our show, where we had Dr. Lauren Tessier of Life After Mold, and and it came up that that you and I and one of our friends, Tim Bear, were in Chicago in 1999, which like shows our age. We were in Chicago and we did a class on microscopy at the McCrone Institute, which actually they still do classes like that. And I'm going to put a link in the chat and on our website. But let's start there, because I think that's where our our subjective science of mold sampling interpretation kind of got started. So why don't you explain our little adventure we had in Chicago?
So that's actually that's a great trip down memory lane, and I think it's a good starting point. So so for those of you in the audience, so Tim Bear is another consultant, similar size company to mine. We're both small business owners in the indoor environmental space, and we met being on the NADCA board of directors years ago. So we started with the National Air Duct Cleaners. So we both transitioned into dealing with microbial and mold activities back in the mid 90s. We were doing it mostly on the HVAC side. So to that end, I'm just setting the stage for how I got into the mold work. It was more from HVAC hygiene work. So we decided to go and actually take a microscopy class to actually be qualified to use a microscope, which makes a lot of sense. So McCrone Institute is one of the premier places to learn that, and they offer a 40-hour class, which again, certainly you don't have a degree, you're not end all whatever, but 40 hours of intense study with some qualified people is will get you down the right path. So Susan joined us there, and so we took that week-long class in Chicago. The instructor was Dr. John Shane. We learned a ton from him, and he brought up made us understand a lot of how much subjectivity there is in direct microscopic analysis, which is what's used for spore traps and tape lifts, and even some bulk sampling and swabs that are then plated out on a glass slide. So a lot of subjectivity there. Interestingly enough, Susan, it's funny you mentioned that, because that was almost where the idea for Healthy Indoors was born too. And that was it. Was it in 99 or 2000?
It was 99.
It was 99. Okay. Yeah. Because I remember we had dinner talking about doing something and we wanted to do something online that had video. But of course, in 99, the bandwidth issues, you couldn't, live streaming was very difficult. I know we did our first live stream uh, back in like 2003 and it was really difficult to say the least. So, yeah. So, did I answer your question at all or I just meander?
You meandered a little bit, but that's okay.
So I guess to that end, so let me run with that for a second. So I've been teaching, been involved with mold remediation and consulting for a long time, since the early 90s. And, before the term mold remediation was even being used widely in the industry. Um, and, I made a lot of just horrible mistakes early on because there wasn't a lot of guidance on how to do this, right? I mean, I was doing mold sampling in the field back before people commonly use spore trap technology, right? Because before we had things like the aerosol and the other type of cassette type spore traps. So where we had to actually take a slide and grease it with lithium grease and use either a single stage Burkhardt impactor or Allergenco. There were some crazy devices back then. They were pretty cool, but spore trapping was really kind of not commonly done. And most of the guidance documents, most of the cognizant authorities back then relied heavily on single stage or multi-stage Anderson type samplers. So culture samples, the Petri dish and the impactor, right? Which, the world's changed a little, right? So I guess one of the things I would pose out to the audience is those of you, in this audience, and chime in the chat, please. How many of you are directly involved with doing consulting work where you're doing mold sampling? And if so, what are your primary sampling methodologies that you use? Do you use spore traps? Do you use culture plates? Do you use swabs, tape lifts, or something else? So one of the things that became blatantly apparent to me, though, early on in the industry, is that each one of these sampling methodologies only looked at part of it, right? And Susan, we got that. We discussed that when we were out in the class, right? Look, just
Yeah.
doing the direct microscopy. So so we'll get into direct microscopy in a second, but I just want to set the stage for the overview here. Every one of these methodologies is very target specific. Spore traps, basically look at everything, all the particles flying in the air, and give you the opportunity to look at them under direct microscope review. But there's a lot of organisms, mold organisms, right, spores, that look the same when they're broken up and not in their full structure, their full fruiting body structure. So under a microscope in an air sample, a penicillium spore and an aspergillus spore and a lot of other ones that are round and the spherical 2 micron or whatever 1 to 3 micron size particles, they tend to look the same if you don't see them in the whole structure. So that's what happens, like with spore traps. Your reviews on your reports will say Penicillium aspergillus-like or Aspergillus penicillium-like or merospores. There's all these other terms that different laboratories use, but they lump them all together. So that, to me, is a big problem that we can talk about a little later. Now, the converse of that, using the culture, the single stage impactors like the Anderson N6, you're putting an auger plate or agar, or however you pronounce it. I say auger, and you're putting that in there. So, but there's a media in that auger plate's made up of a media that's target specific. There's all different types of mediums that you can put in the Petri dish, and certain things will grow certain organisms more readily than other organisms. So here's the problem: there's not one single auger plate that catches every type of mold in the air equally and lets it grow on that plate. And the other problem is the only thing that you find in that type of a sample is spores that germinate and become viable colonies. Okay, so it's only viable, it's colony forming units is how it's reported, where spore traps reported in spores per cubic meter, but you can look at fragments in a spore trap too. So I went on and on here, but when you're ready for your next question, bring it up.
Well, okay. I am ready for my next question. So where do people learn how to do all this sampling, mold sampling, or any kind of air sampling? Is it just information you can Google, or is there specific standards out there that teach you? Is there specific manufacturers that like, kind of like say, hey, you're going to be a sampler and, this is how you do it?
Yes. There's a lot of different places that people get the information. I mean, AIHA has a field sampling guide. There's a lot of cognizant authorities like ACGIH that have documents out there, like the Bioaerosols Handbook, and there's a lot of documents coming from that side, from the industrial hygiene side, that discuss specifically how to do these things. And some of that stuff needs some updating, by the way, but that's another story. Manufacturers of the products tend to have some guidance material. A lot of the laboratories, quite frankly, a lot of the larger lab entities out there that that you might send your samples to be analyzed at, actually have guidance documents. Best practices on how to do sampling. So there's a lot of good information out there. But I think moreover is the big picture of what samples should you be taking? Why are you sampling? What are you trying to find? What are you looking for? And there's just a whole bunch of questions.
Those are my next questions.
Yeah, that's the problem. There's a whole bunch but okay, so, and I'll let you ask the question, but I just want to preface it by saying, if you don't ask this question first, like, what am I trying to find and why am I doing this sampling, you can't even decide what methodologies to use, can you?
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a problem, right? So herein lies your dilemma, is that us in the consulting community, tend to reinvent the wheel a lot in this industry, because there's no agreed upon clearance samples or clearance specs, right? Like in other indoor environmental fields like radon, asbestos, lead. I mean, there's pass and fail numbers. They're very black and white. You have a target number to shoot for, and right or wrong, it's at least it's a pass or fail. It's pretty clear. But with mold, like, we make it up. We do comparisons to the outdoor. We do comparisons sometimes to unaffected areas. What's good, what's bad. I mean, it's pretty much judgment calls all the time.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you right there. And Terry Sofer is going to ask his question, because it definitely goes along with this.
Perfect. Hi, Terry.
Hey.
Before you ask your question, everybody else that's in the audience, please turn your cameras on. Don't be bashful. This is going to be an open discussion. I don't want it to just be Bob and Susan speaking the whole time.
By the way, as a prelude to my question, I just want to note that your full title for this session would have made a great acronym. SIMSI, SSMSI. You should have used it, Bob.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to be a bit provocative with my question.
Perfect.
Why do any mold sampling at all? Now, let me briefly explain. I'm overstating it a bit, but let me briefly explain. Those of us like you and Susan that have read a lot of the research on mold and indoor air quality know that there are now, it's well known that there are lots of species of mold that produce mycotoxins. And it's typical of those species to produce multiple mycotoxins. So, and it's also pretty well known that there's a strong association, if not absolute scientific proof, that mycotoxins can cause all kinds of toxic adverse health effects in humans, not just allergenic effects. So if we know that, why do we even need to sample to find out what kind of mold species are present and whether they're viable or not? Because what research has also told us is that non-viable spores and fragments of mycelia and fragments of spores and so forth can all contain very high concentrations of mycotoxin molecules. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, why is there any value to sampling? If we find mold or indications of mold, then why does it matter what species it is or whether it's viable? Why not just go into full remediation at that point and not spend the money on sampling?
That's a really good question, and I think it's a valid point. And I think sometimes it doesn't make any sense to actually take samples. I don't think sampling always is a great strategy, especially if you visually come in and see a situation where there's, visible, the fungal activity has gotten so big. There's so much mold growth that surfaces are covered. It's visible to the naked eye. I mean, at that point, I don't see any reason to be sampling either, to be honest, Terry. I would never, ask a client to do that. It wouldn't make sense to me. I think where sampling comes into play is when you can't readily identify a situation in the space. Like people are, there's concerns that, we think we might have a problem, but we can't visually see anything. So, that's where that becomes a piece of one of the diagnostic tools in your bat utility belt to go out and actually, get pieces of information. But here's the big question right there. Why sample? Because the sampling, and I mentioned this last week with Dr. Tessier, we're sampling in the IAQ community. We do environmental sampling protocols. So we're, either spore traps, or, we could look for chemicals, like we can look for mycotoxins. We can look for, off gassing like the MVOCs and things like that. But what do those actually directly mean as far as exposure cause relationship to individuals? We don't know that. So we're not doing health-based sampling, right? So that's a problem, because I've asked this question since the beginning. Quite frankly, I've been pissing people off for 30 years about this. I guess I'm like, this many spores per cubic meter. So I go, what the hell does that mean, though? Does that mean that Mrs. Smith's going to get sick or not? Is that the right thing to even look at? And mycotoxins are only part of the picture, Terry. I know mycotoxins are a serious part of the picture, but like our guest last week mentioned, you've got allergic reaction, the IEG responses, which can be very severe in people, and there's different ways that you could be affected by mold in the environment. And certainly from the medical community, and this is where testing really makes sense, and for viables, is dealing with things like Aspergillus fumigatus or Aspergillus niger, which are potential pathogens and cause infections. And in the surgical theater, right, if somebody's performing surgery and those spores get in the open wound, they can cause a deadly infection. So in certain limited cases, I think viable sampling makes a lot of sense too, in those environments especially. But but I don't think it needs to happen all the time. No.
The other thing that research tells us is that in the typical damp building, the indoor air, the building, the damp materials in the indoor air is contaminated with multiple microbiologicals. And so it's logical to assume that there may well be bacterial endotoxins. And as you pointed out, mold also, mold factors that can cause health issues include glucans, beta glucans, and they're found in every cell of a mold organism.
Yeah, and you raise a great counter issue there too. Is that the industry has tended to, and we did it in our title too, intentionally calling it, mold sampling. But the reality is, right, if you're in an environment that has the right moisture conditions to support mold growth in a space, there's a good likelihood that you also could have bacterial contamination in the space. And you can take all the spore traps and all, even the culturable samples for mold you don't identify bacteria with those. So you have to, typically, and bacteria is hard to catch in the air. Aerosol sampling for bacteria is almost, I'm not going to say impossible, but really difficult in the field. You have to use a bubble impactor, and it's just not feasible, really. So you got to do surface sampling for that. The point being is that there's a lot of other constituents there, microbiological constituents, that are not just mold. And I think people are more attuned to that now with the pandemic, right? Because now we're worried about viral issues too. All
right, hey Bob.
Yeah.
Scott Amore is on this call, and he's making a bunch of comments in the chat, and and he actually just said no ... So I'm like, I have to know what said no to.
Scott, hi bud.
He's probably referring to my comments.
Okay, I'm trying to, first of all, I just want to be clear. I'm trying to get my hair to do the Bob Krell thing. So
it's, this honestly, I didn't use product today. This is like take a shower and don't do anything. That's what this looks like. I didn't even style it today. Yeah.
I just want to say this, it is really cool. That's debris, electron microscope image of debris from a used kitchen sponge.
Ooh, yeah. Ooh, yeah.
Love it.
Sponges. No, we don't have those in my kitchen.
Yeah, I apologize. I missed the first 10 or 12 minutes of this. And
You didn't miss that
I
much.
caught Terry discussing some really important making some really important comments. My first thought was, what's an important concentration? What is he considered high concentration of mycotoxins, right? And then you joined in. The conversation keeps rolling. And as I thought of maybe a dozen questions, including a couple for Mr. Hartshorn, I don't even need
We'll get to those questions after you explain the no.
You're right. Here, I actually started it right. Look, I started it right. The big problem at the root of this discussion is an entire industry. And by that, I mean something that some of us have watched since.
Holy shit.
About
You're actually going there?
Yes.
Whoa.
Hey,
You took that away from me. I was going there, but okay, go on.
I know. I'm stealing your thunder.
It's all good.
We have the professional environmental characterization industry, the professional exposure assessment industry, a long time ago was usurped by the common man. And that was because labs and pump salesmen were able to convince anyone they can go out and collect the sample. And indeed, they can stand by a machine and put it in an envelope and get a result from a lab. And labs began to produce industrial hygiene type responses and reports. And so HVAC guys and home inspectors and just name it, right? The list goes on forever. They can all take a sample. And then they put on their truck and they embroider on their shirt, indoor air quality expert and mold expert, indoor health assessment, whatever it is. And we've allowed that to happen. And these people don't have, that's 90% of our industry are those people.
The solution to indoor pollution.
Well, yeah, just get a hose and dilute it, right? Just wash it off. But that is a problem. And that's because they spread the word, right? For every 10 people I get to talk to, or Bob or Terry, there's 1,000 other people that don't have that kind of background, don't have that kind of educated skill, and they're selling samples. So every day I get calls from people, but why are you confusing me? Everyone I talked to said I need to take an air sample, an ERMI sample, an endotoxin friction sample. I don't know. It's a new kind of organism, the endofricotoxin.
Yeah, okay.
Endofrixin, the endofrixin organism.
Okay.
We've got a firm out there right now flying people around the country, sending 2 assessors from 2 different cities to another city, and they are charging $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $10,000, and they're taking 40 and 50 samples. And I have followed them across the country, and I've gone to some of their projects, and I've reassessed for 1/10 of what they've done, and I've changed their protocols, and I've saved people 50, 75, 85% of what the remediation would have cost because of errors and incorrect assumptions. And we can't correct that, right? How do you stop someone from being the best car salesman in the world, right? It's here, you need these car mats. Well, my car comes with car mats. No, you got to have the other car, and you need wax, but my car is brand new. It's wax. No,
that's the problem, though. Honestly, Scott, you're hitting on a good point here, because there's also this psychosocial emotional factor going on. People are, Lauren, Dr. Lauren, last week said that. Yeah, she raised that issue that there's a real stress response with people. Obviously, you and we've all seen this as consultants in the field, where people, when it's their home, like they're upset at work. A situation with work is one thing, but when it's your home and your children and stuff, there's such an emotional attachment to that's, I don't know. It's people are easily swayed by persuasive salesmen in those situations.
They're desperate, aren't they?
Yeah, they're totally desperate.
Because they've been sick for not just a few days or a week or two, like a cold or a flu or some allergy, right? A few months ago, I had allergies and it annoyed the hell out of me for 7 days, right? I wasn't desperate. I know it was going to go away, right? And
I had COVID,
these
and for
people
2
are
weeks it
sick
annoyed
for-
the hell out of me. But I mean, so seriously,
right. I mean, years.
there's
These
other
people have been
things that are
sick
not
for years.
indoor environmental that are factors for people.
Right. I mean, Terry knows this, you know, as good as any, but maybe better than anybody on this group right now. You know, I mean, these people are unfortunately, they're sick and suffering for ages. I meet people every day. Every day I talk to a new person.
So to that point, though, the question is sampling totally just invalid? You shouldn't do sampling. There's no validity to it. I mean, like,
Okay.
I suspect that you do some sampling sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, but it has to be known as an adjunct. It has to. I coined a phrase a long time ago. All sampling results must increase the power of your decision making. And I can show you how to make a decision prior to sampling, and you do a binary. It's a black or white, yes or no, good or bad, positive, negative. So you predict what your sampling is going to do for you. And then you say, is that going to change my decision? So if I want to know what's in the dirt in the house, do I need to sample it? Well, no, because your decision was get rid of the dirt anyways.
Right. So there was no reason to sample it. Like, do you need to test that gypsum board if you're going to tear that gypsum board out? Well, hell no. It doesn't make any sense.
But wait a second, okay? If you're, you know, and then I'm going to pass this off to Pat because he's chomping at the bit to like talk to you.
Okay, I'll mute myself.
Okay, so here's my question, okay? You know, if this sampling is done, you know, to help decision making, who's making the decisions? Is it you as like the car salesman, or is it the consumer who doesn't know what the hell, you know, is the right sample to do anyway? So
That reminds me of that commercial. It was a commercial from Toyota years ago when they had the certified used Toyota cars. And, you know, guy's meeting a girl at some bar and he, what do you do? And he goes, you know, I sell used cars. She goes, ew. And he goes, for Toyota. And she goes, oh.
Well, and you know what? I wish I would have joined last week because I'm very familiar with the early stages of the ICI.
Okay.
Right. And I have a bone to pick. And I would have loved to open it up because one of the problems is the doctors, and we can't get through the doctors. The doctors have pre-established what they want to do. And so I will guarantee you 75% of my patient clients were told by some sort of practitioner, and I'm going to use that as an umbrella term.
It's a good umbrella term.
Because that's what the word they use. You know, when you don't want to use a doctor, you have to go to a practitioner. And which, by the way, about 20% of them are dietitians and nutritionists, but they call themselves a functional medicine practitioner, but they're really trained as a nutritionist. Anyways, I digress.
you digress.
The problem is we can't get to the doctors to teach them what reliability and validity mean. We can't get to them to show them why an ERMI is not valid for answering the question, is there a mold exposure? It's not valid. You use the word valid, right? I think Susan or somebody. Why is it not valid for determining damage in a house? Why are air samples not valid for whatever, right? We can't break through that barrier because that particular organization, as well as several others, have put up huge barriers and roadblocks. And they don't know that the people they're listening to are not presenting accurate information.
Okay. That's it.
And
I mean,
Susan, your answer.
That's your opinion, you know. Maybe, yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, okay, Pat, let's go to you.
Here we go.
I go, wait, okay, Scott muted, good. So I guess my point is I do sample a lot. And the reason I sample a lot is because I'm not sampling necessarily for the health of the occupants in the building. I'm sampling to establish what we call baselines for remediation projects. We want to know, is this remediation simply removing the mold on the wall in room A, or has the mold on the wall in room A jumped into that air return and potentially contaminated room B, C, D, and E? So maybe we need to clean those rooms too after, you know, while we're doing this. We're just establishing the condition of the air based on spore counts. I never turn that into, oh, by the way, homeowner, your health might be affected by this spore count level or something like that. That's not what we're doing it for. So to me, that's a valid, and there's a lot more to that. We don't have the time. That's a valid process because I'm then coming back in after the project and I'm doing the exact same sampling again. And in a lot of cases, we might have a set of what we would consider to be acceptable samples up front. You know, everything looks fairly normal fungal ecology, or however you want to call it. And then in the end, we come in and we got 10,000 Stachy per cubic or cubic meter. Well, the mold on the surface that I swabbed was all Stachybotrys. So
Yes, so
there's a
somebody
problem
knocked some
with-
of it loose somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, so the probability is
Yeah.
that the remediation contractor caused that problem. And in 17 years, by doing that with the local remediation contractors, they have paid for that cleanup every time that has happened. The homeowner or building owner has not been responsible for that because we have fairly valid proof that it likely came from the remediation contractor's failure. So that's where we use sampling the most.
Mhm.
But we all get that call. I don't feel good in my house, I want it sampled, or I don't feel good at work, I want it sampled. Those come with, and Scott and I, every time Scott and I get on the phone, it's like 4 hours, but those come with a long, lengthy process before sampling should ever be done. And
Sure.
it's the
Right.
last
Right.
part.
Sampling shouldn't be the first part of your protocol. If it is, you're a pump jockey and you don't
Yeah.
actually probably know what you're doing.
And I agree with Scott, 90-something%, Bob or Scott said this, 90-something% of the guys out there, and we're plagued with it locally over the last 5 years or so. The home inspectors all became air sample guys. And I am just overwhelmed with people sending me reports that the home inspector gave them because they don't do data review. They don't know how to do data review. They don't even know what the heck the report means. They just give them to the homeowners. And I don't do anything with them. Sometimes I send them to guys like Scott or Mike Bittner or somebody like that just for fun so they can see what's going on. But I don't do anything with those. I just tell them I have to come in and do my own.
Mhm.
You know, I strongly caution anybody using somebody else's information, or how did they get there? What did they do? What was their hypothesis? You know, what was
Yeah.
their sampling plan? Why did
Yeah.
they make that sampling plan?
Well, that's back to the
Pat
whole,
was,
that's back to the whole subjectivity of it, though. I mean, the reality is, do they come in? Are you doing quiescent samples? You're not stirring anything up. Are you coming in and stomping around? Right there, you can change the whole profile about what you see just by how your activity as the sampler. And I always like joke about that. It's like, well, you know, we can test to see if it, you know, if it passes. It's like, do you want it to pass or not? Because I could actually make a test that fails it or passes just by how I take my sample.
Passes
it's
what?
like,
I mean,
seriously.
what are you trying to pass? You trying to pass what it was like before something happened, after something happened?
But I do, like, for me, I'm gonna throw my input in here. I do agree with taking some baseline stuff on a remediation project to have some data, something numerical, because clients want to see something numerical. You know, that's the problem. And, you know, in our litigious society, you have to have something, but, you know, but then the counterpoint to that is, right, that none of us take enough samples to be statistically significant. So if you're on the other side of that as the expert witness, you can shoot the thing to pieces anyway, because if somebody takes 3 spore traps and starts categorizing the house, what the hell do they know? Nothing. They know 5 minutes and a couple cubic feet of air. That's what they know.
Now, Bob and Pat both gave great description, right? But the real problem is, I mean, look, scroll down the list of people attending this. we need 10 times, we need 100 times more attending this.
We need 1,000 more because I want more viewers on Healthy Indoors.
I agree. And they need to hear us and understand and believe us, right? The problem is what Pat just started describing, I described 90%, right? So we have 10 people here. That means there's 90 other people today taking air samples, both pre-remediation, post-remediation, health assessment, whatever reason, they're taking samples and they're describing it incorrectly. So I would trust Bob to come and do some pre-remediation samples. I would definitely trust Pat.
Why him definitely and just me, you know, not definitely?
No, I'm giving Pat some props.
I'm just messing with you. I'm messing with
He
you.
always thinks I disagree with him, but because he lays out the foundation and the framework for why his sample can be valid, right? He's one of the few people who can take that and describe exactly what he's doing and what he expects and what the result actually means, as opposed to the guy who says, yeah, there was a whole bunch of black Stachybotrys still on the wall after the remediation, but I took an air sample anyways, right? Like, hello, right?
It's got, pass visually.
seen that done.
You need to pass visually before you do it.
Yeah.
If it's not clean, if it's not visibly clean, you freaking did a shitty job. I'm sorry. It's like done.
A long time ago, I started keeping track, and I said, we were working on one of the early versions of the 520, and I said, I have never granted a clearance the first time out for the visual. So in other words, 100% of every single clearance I ever did failed for the visual, 100%. Starting in like whatever the first hemosiderosis investigation I did, right? I was like, wow, this place is pretty dirty. You guys didn't do a good job. And it continued. And sometimes it would be a little pile in the corner. Sometimes it would be a whole wall full of mold. Who knows what it was? I am still at that batting, right? I'm batting 1,000. I fail every single job I'm on.
You must be
Can
very
I-
popular in Ohio.
It's not my fault.
God.
I don't do the remediation. I just find the crap they leave behind.
See, I get it. And you, Scott, so with my history prior to New York State, regulating mold, and you couldn't wear, be on both sides. We were a design build company, so we went out and did spec work, and we did cleanups, and we did them really well for a lot of years. But that gave me 20 plus years of experience being on both sides of the fence. And I understand how hard it is to be a contractor too. And I think sometimes some consultants don't understand what can actually be achieved either. Some consultants, I'm not saying you, but I'm saying in general, something, right? So yeah, it should be it should be clean. If you're doing a remediation, there should be no visible dust or anything anywhere. That's like, if you can't get that through your head as a contractor, you shouldn't be in the industry.
Bob, can I chime in?
Sure.
I gave someone a clue. I gave someone a clue the other day. All the time I go, look, I'm not nitpicky. If I can find the problem from a standing up position without a light, it's pretty significant something left behind, right? It's not. I'm not going for the 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. I'm going something I can see from 8 feet away.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Okay. Now, next is Maurice, and then Pat.
Bob, to try and say, and you've been a remediator, and you know this probably better than anybody who's on the screen today, but to try to say you're going to clear a project because it's visually clean is super suggestive, because we should never use the naked eye to determine, especially in a clearance, whether there is or isn't. I've looked at projects that they looked super clean. But once we took an air sample, we could tell the remediator didn't use a HEPA vacuum, because we had thousands of Aspen, we had thousands of Stachybotrys that was also identified. We had Mucor identified in extremely high numbers. And if you were to look at it, you would have said you could have eaten off of the surfaces.
Well, I would say you can't clear visually. You can fail visually.
Right.
That's the first step of clearance. It's like it has to pass visual, and then to me, you go to the next step.
Right.
Gotcha.
All right.
And then back to sampling, you as a remediator probably know also, unless you have a scope of work or protocol, we do a lot of wall cavity samples because we want to know where that mold has where the mold amplified, and also where the water migrated. And the only way you're going to tell it is to get into those wall cavities. Now, if you're trying to do health related issues, there's no sampling pump on the market that is capable of capturing more than 2 cubic feet of air at any given time. So if you move that pump east or west, north or south, up or down, you've got a capability or probability of getting a complete different set of results. And to take air samples alone, I don't think is good. But wall cavities alone don't give you exposure. They give you a contaminated surface, but they don't give you exposure. And but wall cavities, I think, are necessary. And I think air is necessary, especially if somebody has a health-related issue. It's necessary for them to take that report to their healthcare provider.
How about surface sampling, though? Because we're dealing with microscopic size things. Visually, there can be actual amplification on, like, say, a drywall surface that you can't see with your flashlight and eyes.
Exactly.
You put it under 600 power, suddenly you see it on the bright field microscope.
100%.
All right, Pat, you want to
On
jump
that-
in?
Yeah, on the Bob saying on surface sampling, the only reason I ever surface, a lot of time people want you surface sample just because they want that yes or no. Does that mold sitting on that surface, or is it soot and dryer lit? Which I got a long story on that one. it's not something I use to determine anything to do with the air quality, the health of the occupants or something like that. We're just using it to prove mold or not. And insurance companies, all of them, it seems like they want to see that data. They're always asking for that kind of stuff if they're involved in these things. On the sampling part, I spoke with the guy who invented the aerosol.
Baxter,
Thank you.
Dan
quite a few
Baxter,
years-
right? Yeah.
Yeah, quite a few years ago. And he gave me the impression that it's a 15-foot zone on a 5, or maybe that was 10-minute sample. I don't remember. But that you're collecting 15 feet. Does anybody know anything about that?
You're getting approximately 2.5 cubic feet of air in a 15 liters per minute for 5 minutes, which is kind of like, that's the standard, so that's usually what you're getting. And their collection efficiency, any distance away from that sieve on that cassette, it's not very good. As far as you're not getting a homogeneous sample for an entire room off of a spore trap. No
Okay,
way.
So we have about 80% forced air heating systems in Alaska. We sample with the forced air fans on. We sent, because 72 to 75% of the time in Alaska, your furnace is heating your house. So we sample under normal living conditions. If there's kids walking around, that's the normal house. If there's, whatever, we sample under normal living conditions. That's the process we've been doing for 18 years. We do it every time. We also sample if we're doing something that's like a whole house kind of thing or something like that, or, the minimum samples. Remember, the driver is the money. They're not going to pay for more samples. That's the unfortunate part of this industry. But air returns, put your sample in front of the air return somewhere where the house is bringing the air to, and you sample in that location. But you got to make sure that when you come back to do your secondary sampling, like after remediation, that exact scenario is recreated, or else you're blown.
Your data is, yeah. I mean, one of the things I always like to go back to this parable, because I've done it in classes for 25 years now, but the 6 blind men from Indostan. Susan's going to go, oh my God, he's saying this again. But so, according to this fable, right, this elephant wanders into a village. There's 6 blind elders, and they're tasked with going to the center of the square and deciding what the elephant looks like. So they're all touching the elephant. One grabs around the leg, says, oh, the elephant's like a tree. Another grabs the tail, the elephant's like a rope. Another grabs the trunk, it's like a boa constrictor. Here's the problem. Every one of them, in their very limited perspective, is probably correct with their assessment, but the overall assessment's wrong because it's a very limited view of the total data. So I always say this when I'm teaching, as far as sampling and and doing consulting work, is that I do like to see air sampling. I do like surface sampling. I like laser particle counts. I like thermal imaging, looking for condensation points, moisture meters. I mean, all of it. And even then you're shooting from the hip because you still have just a limited piece of data that you're working with there. The biggest, your best sensory device should be on your shoulders to try to put the stuff together.
I use particulate counters. I started years ago keeping track to help me determine times for sampling.
So you don't overload a cassette. Yeah.
Yeah. Every once in a while you overload a cassette, you're like, what the heck? Well, if you had a particulate counter, you would have seen that up front, that it's a dusty, dirty environment, so you can reduce your minutes.
They're we've been using them since '95. Laser counters. I mean, they're to me, that's just a standard tool. It should be in your belt for that.
Right. And what was the other thing to say? Oh, so the other advocate thing I'm for, and Scott knows this, and I think I talked to you a little bit about, Bob, is the 100% laboratory analysis.
Oh, sure. Again, on spore traps, you're talking about reading the trace. Yeah.
I don't know of a labs out there. I've never heard of a lab under general contract. None of my competitors in this state anyhow do 100% analysis. It's all like that 25% times 4 analysis. So for us, we've been able, so lawyers love that. They love that 100% thing. And it seems to win over, because lawyers sort of like sampling too. They like to see that data. I let them do whatever they want with it. But the other part of it is data review. You got in compared to out, you got background debris ratings, you got percentages of difference on the inside samples, you got types of mold families that are present, ubiquitous or not, you got hyphofragment counts, you got bacteria, the mold scores in our reports. I mean, there's like 9 different things you look for on data review. I don't know of anybody else around here that does anything other than inside to out, period. They're done.
And they're just doing spore trap? Because that's to me, that's insane, because how does anybody that just does spore trap, and trying to make a decision on that, deal with Aspen or Penasp when that's inside and outside. How do you know that it's not penicillium chrysogenum outside, Aspergillus versicolor inside? You're dead in a deposition with that, because you can't you cannot argue that point unless you've done cultures or PCR or something to back it up.
Right.
So, and to your point, with the, as far as, like the collection efficiency and doing full traces, think about it. You've got the sample cassette, you collect 2.5 cubic feet of air approximately, right? That gets analyzed, but that's not a homogeneous air to an environment. There's stratification, there's temperatures, there's wind turbulence, there's the size of the particles, because small particles don't settle, the big particles fall out. Stachybotrys doesn't fly very well. You can go on and on with all these different points. They go to a lab and they only read 25% of it, and that's subjective because somebody's reading it with their eye. 1, 2, it's like, you got the microscopist down there, looking at that stuff, and and they come up with numbers, and then it comes back to you and you spores per cubic meter. And what the hell does that mean? What does that even mean? So my concern here is, you're right. If they're only reading 25% of the surface, you're adding another tier of variability that's just crazy.
All
Because
right,
they're not
Bob.
accurate
All right, hold on,
anyway.
guys. I'm going to jump in. Patsy, you're next, and then Scott.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, see this lab here? AEML
Yep, we know them.
reads 100% of the slide. Okay, so
I
there's one.
talked to EML a couple months ago. They told me they read 100% for Stachybotrys only. You have to have a special contract with them in order to do any higher than that. That's what they told me.
Oh, well, that's not what they're doing with my reports. They're reading 100% of the slide.
That's
So
good.
just to give you an idea that there is one out there that's doing it.
There's a bunch. A lot of this, there's smaller labs too that do. Some of the boutique labs do that as well.
Right. And so just to give a summary of this whole conversation. So I did remediate. I was on the remediation side of it starting in the early 90s for 10 years. And then I branched off into my own consulting for the last 16, 17 years. Right. So I have the ability to look at things from a contractor side and a consulting side. Right. So you guys are talking about air samples and all these things and flaws with all of them. Yeah, they're all flawed. But, when I go out to do an assessment, and I call it an assessment, first off, I spend a good amount of time on the telephone with the person. I ask them all the things about them, about their house, how long they've lived there, what's going on, what's the history, blah, 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 blah. So then you have a baseline. Okay, what's going on? What is your problem? What are you trying to solve? Right. So, most of the time it's the mold issue. And then it's an investigation. It's basically an investigation. So there has to be an appropriate sampling strategy, right? Whether that's air, surface, whatever, it has to be appropriate, and you could go into what's appropriate and what isn't. But every single assessment I do is very, it's the same, right? So I get called into depositions a lot, and all my reports and everything I do and all my methods and techniques are pretty similar. So I'm not, playing favorites with different projects and stuff, right? So it's an investigation. It's a lot of interviewing, talking to the people, what's going on, what's happened, appropriate air sampling, where and when, why are you taking these, right? Like the customer needs to know. There's an answer for that. And if they got somebody coming out there that's just taking air samples and they can't answer why and where they're taking them and why they're taking them in those areas, red flag, right? There's a reason. It's a piece of the investigation. It's not the whole thing. It's just it's a piece, the air samples, the visual inspection, that's another piece of it. The history is another piece of it. If they're getting moldy smells, you can measure MVOCs, but it's not real practical. MVOCs cause health issues, right? That's the smell you're getting. So, there's all these things that go into it. And then boom, here's my report. It goes to reputable remediation contractors, right? I tell if they're my client, I'm like, here's a list of certified reputable remediation contractors in this St. Louis area that I can vouch for because I've done thousands of jobs with them before and after. They get the report, they follow the plan. I go back, I do the clearance, which is again, a whole bunch of stuff at the end, right? Mm-hmm. Did they follow the plan? Is it clean? Is there no visible mold? Does the air sample meet the normal fungal ecology criteria? blah, blah, blah. And I have a very good partnership. I'm independent of all these contractors, but I have a very good partnership with a lot of reputable, credentialed, certified remediation contractors in this area. So it's a team effort, right? We're
Mhm.
working together on this as a team effort. It's not me, the mold police coming in telling everybody with a whip what to do, right?
But Patsy, do you think that's typical of the industry though? I mean, because like what you're
No, I
describing
do
is like
not think
really
it's
like
typical.
I'm going to say it's exemplary. It shouldn't be. I mean, I think it should be standard, but I mean,
Right.
the fact, right?
No, it is not typical. This is the problem, right? And so I also get hammered, like with Pat's, what somebody said, I get hammered daily with people calling me getting substandard inspections and remediation. And they want me to come out and unravel it all and fix it and put it back together and redo it. It's horrible, right? So, I'm constantly in this battlefield of, battling people that have no business doing this at all, right? And so that's just my 2 cents.
That's
right?
good. But
Yeah.
but how do we how as an industry then, I really wish we had another hour. As an industry, how do we combat that? Because that's I've been asking that question for 30 some years now. I've been doing this 35
Well,
years.
Yeah, I mean, I've built my reputation in the St. Louis area, and it's funny because yeah, it's about money and economics, and it costs to do everything the right way, and I educate people on the phone. I'm like, look, this is how you need to do it. This is how you should do it if you want it done right. There's a bunch of other ways to do it, but and it's funny, you can have insurance adjusters who don't want to pay for mold inspections for claims, but if they have something happen in their own house, they call me. They don't want to have it, they're insured to it, but
That's classic.
right, classic. So that's the thing. It's like I think you just be a professional, do the right thing, try to make partnerships with reputable remediation contractors in your area. I mean, there are some projects, like if I do a mold inspection and report and there's a protocol and the customer calls me back, say a month later, says, okay, come out, it's ready for clearance. And I'd never heard from anyone and I didn't know it started and I know who it is. And I ask him who did it. And I find out it's some no name or somebody, I have no idea who it is. And, I call the person and I ask him a couple questions. First answer he gives me, I'm like, nope. I'm like, I'm not coming. I'm not coming back. I can't come back and re-inspect it and do a clearance.
Yeah. Well, that happens. It's like New York has licensing, so that happens in New York all the time, right?
Yeah.
Any states with licensing, the licenses don't require that the same in New York they're called assessors. The same assessor doesn't have to do the front end and the back end post evaluation, which to me is like I am not going in and assessing somebody else's work when I haven't seen any of the work, never saw it before they touched it. I walk away from that every freaking time.
I absolutely will not do that, but I
near it.
absolutely will not go back and
Somebody
reinspect
else's.
a project that was done by a substandard remediation contractor.
So-
It is a drama cluster. And
Pat.
I'm not doing it, right? And it says right on my report, when I give them the report, I'm like, you have to do all this. What?
No, it's just Pat's been very politely raising his finger.
Oh, anyway,
Yeah.
I say on my report, when I give it to the client, it says all these steps need to be completed by a reputable credentialed certified remediation contractor in order for me to come back and do clearance. It's in the report, and of course they never read it. And then they call me and then I'm like, I can't come back. And then they get mad at me because I'm not coming back. I'm like, I'm not.
You're a difficult consultant to work with. I'm just messing
No.
with you. No,
I mean, and
you're
I'm
doing
really
it right.
not, it's
No,
like,
I'm being
I
funny.
think the key is like communication up front. What do you expect? How's it supposed to go? I'm like, you can do whatever you want with your house. I don't care, but I'm not going to come back. Here's what you're supposed to do. And I can't come back and clear it if the steps aren't being done. Right. So anyway, that's all I got.
Very good, Patsy. That was awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So it is 1:54. However you guys want to work it, let's do some final thoughts. Let's wrap this up because Bob had a completely different show planned. So I think this has been great that it's now it's different. Okay. All right. So final thoughts. Scott, you go first and then we'll go to Pat and then whoever else.
You limited final thoughts though. You can't go 5 minutes each.
Oh, Scott.
We have to establish an industry justification for what we're doing. We use that word all the time. Pat's heard me use it. We need to begin to gather our resources together, our strengths together. We have to start to put a stop to the mass marketing of sampling. So somehow, you know, the bulk of people here and this have to get together and say sampling is not where you start. And if you're going to sample, you better have a reference for it. I wanted to ask about the endotoxins, the mycotoxins, the surfaces. What reference are you telling people that there's a health problem if you have a condition too, right? I want to see the references and the standards that say, if you have a condition too, which is an invisible condition, right? Condition 3 is easy. That's visible mold, visible dirt, dust, and debris. That's not a problem. That's what we all agree on, visible clearance. I want to know, if you take a sample, how do you know it's a health problem? It's not an aesthetics problem. It's not a utility problem. Invisible spore, I never saw condition 2 ever, you know, jam up the gears of some device or make a computer not work. Never saw it mess up the surface of a sofa or a wall. And I want to know, how do you know it's a health effect? I don't care if it's Stachybotrys or Cladosporium or Alternaria. I want to know how many spores per cubic meter you're allowed before or during a health problem. And I'm going to tell you right now, there is no reference for that.
Yeah, there isn't.
Air, mycotoxins or spores. So why are we taking all these samples?
And another side to that is person A, person B, person C. You know, you're standing in a room that's got 100,000 stackies per cubic meter. Person A might be just perfectly fine. Person B's got the sniffly, sneezy, coffee, achy, stuffy head, fever kind of a thing. And person C might be laying on the floor waiting for an ambulance.
Not from the mold.
But yeah, but I mean, why?
Not from condition 2 mold.
Is it because of the Stachybotrys in the air? Is it because they're just super sensitive to spores? I mean, there's no way to determine that health aspect by air sampling. It doesn't do it. That's why I only use it for our own in-house use to base ideas and get an idea of what's going on for remediation purposes. And when people call and say, I don't feel good in my house, we have long discussions before any sampling plan is ever put into place. And we start with and Bob's going to like this, we start with the multiple mega amounts of samples, and then the price tag usually drives the job right off a cliff, and it never happens. So I won't do the 3 sample, I don't feel good in my house thing.
Well, you're also clarifying that you're taking environmental samples. You're not taking samples that are in any way, shape, or form you can make health claims with, because we can't, because we don't have that correlation. It doesn't, Scott hit it. We don't have that.
No, let them.
How many spores make somebody sick? I don't know.
Let them take it to their doctor, the results and all this stuff.
Their
and then
doctor
let their
doesn't know
doctor-
either.
Right, and then let their doctor be the supposed person that's the expert in this field. You know, not it ain't me.
It's apples to oranges. It's environmental samples to, like, you know, blood work. No, there's no correlation.
Their doctors were informed by somebody who never even went to a biology or chemistry class. Come on, we know the industry. We know who's informing who.
Right, but let that be. Let them deal with
Sure.
that. Don't just stay the heck out of that part. Just they want to do that, let them do it. But don't be the guy that makes those decisions. That's my advice to anybody in this thing.
I'm going to be provocative again. Yes, everything you're saying is correct. And put in the context of the basic objective and purpose, that's to help people's residences or buildings that they're working in be healthy, so that the people are healthy, right? And the dilemma that we all face is that research is showing that microbiological toxins, I'm not talking about allergenic effects, okay? What concern me are the toxigenic effects. The research is showing that microbiologicals can have very toxic health effects. They can be cytotoxic, actually kill cells. They can turn off all kinds of genetic genes that affect the signaling between cells and whether a cell does what it's supposed to do, whether the cell can get energy, generate energy, whether it can get oxygen and nutrients through the cell wall. There's research demonstrating all of that. And we know that people vary in their genetics. And therefore, what you're susceptible to might be very different than what I'm susceptible to, right? Those are all things that you well-informed, top-notch professionals that have been speaking, you're aware of all that. And so the basic dilemma it creates, it seems to me, is that the standards that exist now in terms of what's acceptable or what's healthy and so forth, I'll overstate it, are irrelevant, because what's going to be healthy for a particular person is going to vary. So I think the goal needs to be to create the healthiest possible indoor air environment for people, because there's no standard that's going to work for even a majority of people, in my opinion.
It's like a completely different show on like what's considered like a top-notch IAQ health standard. Scott, you're shaking your head again. Why are you shaking your head?
I'd like to chime in before Scott comes back in because he's already had a couple turns. Terry, very well said. I don't know how many of you have been following the litigious cases across the country. In Florida, we just had in early May a $62 million case that it was a jury case for someone who suffered from severe mold ailments, supposedly. And they had numerous doctors, one from Johns Hopkins Hospital who testified in her defense. She was from Florida. And it was the highest case ever. Now, I know it's going to be appealed by the insurance company because 62 million, they're not enough to pay out willingly. However, there's starting to be more and more doctors that are taking a stance. And I do think there's times, we do a lot of litigious work, and most of ours really was the remediation justified? And therefore you need sampling to tell how impregnated the wall cavities were with fungal and water compromise. But when it comes to exposure samples, we do limited exposure samples, and then we still recommend the results from those to be read by a doctor. And I agree, most doctors don't know. But Terry, I think you're really onto something, because the science is starting to come of age. And the only way you're going to find out is to take samples. Scott, if you sit back and you don't take a sample, you're going to be chewed up in court and they're going to spit you out, unfortunately. And no offense against you, Scott, because you're an excellent practitioner. I followed you over the years. I've been in this business since 1972. And I first met Bob back in 1992. And I was at a conference with Bob in 2005. I don't know why his hair never turned gray and mine did.
I don't dye it. Actually, the sides are all gray. That's why I wear this crop.
But when you look at over the years, we're starting to see the science is finally starting to some degree catch up. It's a long ways from being there, but we're starting to see a little more of the science. And I'm going to try to get that case, Bob, and send out that information to you.
That's a big one.
And there was 2 settlements undisclosed in that. With the other 2 parts, she sued 3 people, 3 groups, and there was 2 undisclosed settlements in that. And then there was the Mega Million that was the only one that went to court. So she's rich.
And there's a lot that you don't hear about too. Like I was involved with one years back, like late 90s, that ended up settling out of court. But I mean, it was over a $10 million settlement, but it never hit news or anything, never got out there. So there's a lot of that behind the scenes too, because that's one of the things insurance companies really don't want to have that stuff out public, and rightly so, because you got to also question, whatever. Anyway, who else needs to go?
We don't decide science based on court cases, first of all.
We really shouldn't.
And court cases are rarely, if ever, decided on science. I just want to point that out. So you cannot use any litigation as an example or justification to take samples. I just want to remind you all of that. If you all recall the Melinda Ballard case, which I think everyone here does, remember what that was settled on. They chose intentionally to not bring medical witness.
Yeah, they didn't. Dr. Strauss and them never testified, right?
That is
or
correct.
Honey,
Why?
or any of them. Yeah.
Because the plaintiff's attorney, Melinda's attorney, knew that it would drag it out for another 6 to 10 weeks. These are his words, and he knew that he had already won the case because the farmers' executives
Right. There's bad faith. They clearly demonstrate the bad
proved
faith.
bad
Yeah.
faith. So every time someone tells me there's a victory, I want to know why. And then I want to know, is it actually justified and was it just? And I'm going to guarantee you the dollars don't match.
No, I told,
Another
so
thing is, the reality is, I still don't see the references in the environment. We have a bunch of, science, but we have no good environmental data. Every time I see a doctor, every time I see one of these groups of doctors or physicians or somebody telling people to go take samples, they do not have environmental data. And Terry is right about we're early stages of science, but we cannot relate some laboratory science or some cell biology type science or some immune system science to the environment. There is no connection.
there's no
at all.
correlation. Yeah, you're right.
It's
None.
not even a correlation. It's not even association.
Yeah.
Except with extreme situations.
Right.
So go to the cleanliness, the visual clearance. If you have visual clearance, what is left that can possibly cause a problem? That's what I keep asking. I've not heard anybody say on this panel or any other panel, where's the references when you have visual clearance?
Well, how do you have, but there's times where you don't have total visual clearance, right, Scott? I mean, like, if you're not doing a total gut of a building, you don't know every wall cavity. There's places you can't do visual clearance if it's not all opened up. So that doesn't totally answer your answer.
And there wasn't a problem in the wall cavity. It's out of the scope of the work.
Or they missed it.
Who missed it?
Well, you maybe as the consultant, maybe you missed it, because you're not paid enough money to do invasive inspections of everything, and
Right.
people won't let you tear their buildings apart for you to look for things.
So go all the way back to the Burge comments, right? That we relied on. What's in a wall and how the hell does it get out? It's just like the subtle dust in a duct. It doesn't.
It gets out all the time, though. Come on, pressure differentials. We can get into that one. It's like the building dynamics of wind loading and all that stuff. There's stuff moving in and out of wall cavities all the time in buildings. Anyway, this is great though. By the way, we need more time.
I love listening to everybody, and all I can do is urge everyone to try to get together, try to find common ground. We have a lot of standards out there right now that are being, written. Consensus is being argued. Everybody's got to chip in and bring with you references. Show the references. Get the solid science, whether it's Terry or Maurice. Let's see what the hell you're using. Bring it to the committees, right? There's one at ISARC. There's one at ASTM. These are active committees. Bring your stuff. The committees will welcome you as a commenter. You can bring information to the committees if you know how to get to the committee. Bring your stuff and explain it. Let the committees hear.
I mean, that's something we actually need to get that information more readily discernible, that people know how to actually contact committees and get that, because I don't know if that's common knowledge on how you would get to one of these committees.
Call me.
Well, call you. But I mean, I think it's an article, Scott. I think you should write at least a short piece on, how people could get that type of information.
That's a good idea.
It really is, because that's, clearly an important thing to have happen.
Excellent idea.
I got one piece of advice. If you're going to call Scott, clear your calendar for the rest of the day. So.
Well, I mean, it's always very interesting. I've never had a non-interesting conversation with you, Scott, ever.
Yeah, they're long conversations, but they're good conversations. But clear your calendar. You're going to need some time.
All you have to do is say goodbye and click. It's
But you
easy.
could, that's slightly a-hole-ish, but yeah, you could do that, I guess.
Yeah, but I respect that. I respect that.
I mean, New York. I'm from New York, so we're allowed to do that. It's almost part of our demeanor.
I'd be hurt if you didn't just hang up on it.
Does anybody else have a final comment they want to make? Because we're way over time, but I don't want to cut anybody off either here. So let me just jump on a couple of things. One of the places where we could continue discussions like this, is so I have to announce this again because some of you may not be aware of it. Wow, that didn't go all the way through. We just last week launched a project we've been working on for a year. It's the Healthy Indoors online global community, and this is actually a platform. It's a dedicated platform for indoor environmental topics that will allow you to get in there and have these conversations. We're going to be live streaming the shows to that. There's discussion boards. Think of LinkedIn and Facebook on steroids specifically for indoor environmental topics, because that's pretty much what it is. And all the discussion boards and this networking stuff is free. So you can sign up for it for free and utilize that. And then we have some premium stuff. We just the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization's national conference, annual conference. We'll be live streaming that on the community. That's a pay-per-view, but it'll be there in September. And we have a few other things that'll be happening there too. So you can get to all that. How could you make this happen? Well, if you go to the healthyindoors.com site and click on community, that will actually take you to a page that will get you down the path of being able to register, and you can potentially get a free membership right there. The other thing that we're doing is for the time being, so I'll just let you know, we are offering free pro membership. So the pro membership is going to allow some discounts on some of the pay-per-view live streaming and that sort of thing, and some premium content that you wouldn't just get in the free membership. But we're giving those away too at this juncture. So that's so I would definitely check it out, because I think it's going to be an opportunity for people to be able to communicate more. What we're trying to create is a hub, right? An information exchange hub between academia, between us and the practitioner end, and really between end users too, to be able to get information and share information. So I welcome you all to get involved in that. Not many there, because we just opened the door. I mean, I think there's like 40 people on it. Well, we just opened it up a few days ago. So we're really excited about how this is going to shape up and open some doors for people. Other than that, the other thing I want to announce, do I have it where I can get to it? Yeah. I didn't queue up my graphic here, but I'll get to it in a sec. So next Tuesday night, last month we debuted a new show, and it's the Healthy Indoors After Hours show, and that's not a great graphic on it, and you're seeing us the live stream there. But the After Hours show is a once-a-month show. It's an evening show. It runs from 7 p.m. Eastern time to 8:30 p.m. Different format. So picture, I mean, as loose as we were here today, picture looser. So the format is, you're at a conference and it's 7 o'clock at night, and you walk into the lounge and there's other professionals there, and you basically just talk to each other and have conversations. So it's relatively unstructured. So next week we have Dr. David Kraus and Jay West. Jay West as an individual is really interesting. He's come from the building performance side. He was involved in that, and recently in the indoor environmental community. And Dr. David Kraus has been a regular on the show, Legionella expert, and really very knowledgeable guy who's been in the industry for a good long time. So so I invite you to watch that show as well. That show will live stream to the community, so you could sign up for your community membership and watch it there. We will also be streaming it here on healthyindoors.com. So you can go to the .com site under the Healthy Indoor shows and get to it. So there's your options. Susan, are you back in? Are you still here? I guess we're going to be closing it up, because we've run way over time. I really appreciate you guys. All of your great input here. This has been a great show. And Susan was right. We didn't actually plan it this way. It was going to go a little bit more structured, but this is fantastic. So thank you all for joining in. We're going to do more of these, because now I can see where this is a form that doesn't exist, correct? You don't have any other place where you can come on and actually talk. There's other shows. I mean, they're usually one directional. That's one. And by the way, that's another plug for the community, guys. That's one of the things we'll be doing, is these type of things, meetups, Zoom meetings in the community where it's just, moderated, but an opportunity for people to meet and talk. So we're really, really excited about just the opportunities to do things like that going forward. So thank you so very much for joining us again this week. So we'll see you next Thursday, same time, same channel, 1 o'clock to 2 p.m. Eastern time, actually Eastern Daylight Time now. So until then, I'm your host, Bob Krell.